Welcome into the College Football Recap Show. I'm your host, Dylan Lieck. I'll be breaking down everything in college football week 7 that we saw today. I am currently sitting here at about 2:28 a.m. Central Standard Time, so all the games have concluded for today, and we're going to break down everything for you. And we'll go through the top 10 and just kind of run through what everybody did from the top 10. So we'll start with Georgia. Georgia played at home against Vanderbilt today. They defeated Vanderbilt 37-20. This game was closer than it should have been. Georgia led by, I believe, 24-7 at halftime, so by 17. But Vanderbilt made a late run. They got it as close as 10. It was 30-20 after a Vanderbilt touchdown, and Vanderbilt actually had a 2-point conversion attempt with a chance to cut this to a single possession game. And it should never be this close with a team like Vanderbilt. When you look at Georgia, this team has had these type of struggles all year, and I'm not quite sure what is wrong with Georgia, but there's just something a little bit off about the Bulldogs this year. I'm not a big fan of Carson Beck. He's not been bad, but he's not been great. And overall, this Georgia team, you look at their results last week, obviously was the only impressive win they've had, and that's when they defeated Kentucky convincingly at home as 14-point favorites, covered easily. But you look at that matchup, and Kentucky came into that game undefeated, but a bit overrated. And we saw Kentucky this week get absolutely walloped at home by a decent Missouri team. But it's just a game that against teams. It's just games against teams that Georgia has that shouldn't be this close. And they played Auburn 2 weeks ago. It was tied with under 4 minutes to go. They needed a late touchdown drive and basically a domination on the final drive by Brock Bowers in order to win the game. Slipped by Auburn early in the year, trailed after the first quarter at home against South Carolina 14-3, and ended up coming back to win 24-14. But this Georgia team just hasn't looked all that impressive. I don't even think they should be ranked the number 1 team in the country. It's basically a product of a poor schedule for Georgia, along with the fact that they're back-to-back national champs. I understand that. But I'd be surprised if they continue on this path if come the first college football playoff rankings, week 10, if Georgia is number 1. So, again, we'll see what happens with Georgia, but unimpressive today, and they've been unimpressive throughout the season. And another key thing to look at, Brock Bowers, late in the Vanderbilt game, went down with an injury. X-rays were negative, but they're going to wait and see on an MRI, and if he's out for the season, it could be trouble in Athens there. Moving on to the number 2 ranked team in the country, the Michigan Wolverines. The Michigan Wolverines were in action today against the Indiana Hoosiers, and Michigan absolutely destroyed Indiana 52-7. And if I'm talking about Georgia being unimpressive, I will talk about Michigan being absolutely the most impressive team I've seen so far. I thought a couple weeks ago that maybe Texas was the best team. Obviously, the loss to Oklahoma hurts their resume. But when you look at this Michigan team, they are an absolute complete team. J.J. McCarthy at quarterback, not elite, but you look at this team, they're a player or two away from playing for a national title last year. And I do believe Michigan would have given Georgia a much better game. I'm not saying they would have won or it would have been a super close game, but I guarantee you they would not have gotten beat 52-7 like TCU did. So I think Michigan so far this season, J.J. McCarthy, as I said, good, not great, but he's improved. He's gotten better since last year, and he doesn't have to be great with this team. They have Blake Corum at running back. They can run the ball. They have good wide receivers, Roman Wilson. They have an elite defense, and it's not a talented defense. They're talented. I don't mean to say they're not talented, but it's not a player that's got a star-studded cast, right? Not a team that's got a bunch of stars. It's just a solid unit. They are rock solid. You absolutely cannot get any push or movement against that defensive line. When Michigan knows you are going to run, you cannot run on them. They are too good in the trenches, and they have absolutely been the most impressive team in the country. Unfortunately, their schedule has just been so poor that we haven't gotten to see them be tested. But again, we had this issue last year, right, where Michigan hadn't been tested, and then they go in and just, beat Penn State and kill Ohio State, walk their way through the Big Ten championship game, and go to the college football playoff. I would be surprised if that doesn't happen again. I think Penn State's a little bit better this year. We'll get to them in a second. I'll get to Ohio State in a second as well, but I think Michigan not only has looked like the best team in the country, but I think they are the best team in the country. And I believe we're going to see that as we get towards the middle and end of November. I believe November 11th, the Wolverines will travel to Penn State to take on the Nittany Lions. That'll be a giant game for Michigan. And then the last game of the season on the 25th of November, they take on Ohio State at home. So we're going to get to see a lot more about the Wolverines come mid to late November. As of right now, though, the rest of their schedule, I just see them rolling everybody. But, you can only play who's on your schedule, and they've done what they've had to do. There is not a single team who they have played so far who has scored double digits on the Wolverines defense. I don't care who you play, that's impressive. And when you look at what their issues were in that college football playoff last year, it was the defense giving up a lot of points to an explosive TCU offense. So I love this Michigan team. They look like the best team in the country. I'm a believer in Big Blue right now. I'm not a believer in the number 3 team, Ohio State. They defeated Purdue 41-7 at Purdue. And obviously you look at the score and, what more could you ask for? But I just don't see Ohio State as being a really great team this year. Kyle McCord, the quarterback, has been very average. He had a pretty good game numbers-wise against Ohio State, but man, talk about how a play or two could change a season. Ohio State had a 4% post-game win expectancy in the game against Notre Dame. That means based on the numbers, based on the stats, based on the situational plays that occurred, there was a 4% chance they win that game. Notre Dame gave that game away. Marcus Freeman absolutely threw up on himself in the fourth quarter, late down the stretch. Not only did Notre Dame choke the last drive defensively, they also had the ball with a chance to run the clock out and made some really poor play calls, including an incomplete pass on second down that allowed Ohio State to retain one timeout, which played a massive role in the final drive of the game. But then you look obviously at that final drive, Marcus Freeman decides to rush 3 and drop 8 on 4th and 18. The game is essentially over if you just make a tackle anywhere short of the 2-yard line. They allow Ohio State to catch the ball, get a first down, and then on the final play of the game, you have 10 people on the field, and Ohio State still only gets in by an inch. So that was not an impressive win for me. In my eyes, Ohio State lost the game, and I understand that on their resume it's a win, and a win is a win, and I get that. But in terms of me looking at projecting this team going forward, I don't see Ohio State as an elite team. As I said, quarterback play, average. Even today against Purdue, there's just some throws that McCord makes that you just look and they're 1 or 2 inches away from being just catastrophic mistakes. In the Notre Dame game on the final drive, people forget, the storyline at the end of that game essentially is McCord leads them down the field, great drive to win the game. But he threw a ball early in that drive that was an absolute interception 99% of the time, and the defensive back dropped it. And 99 times out of 100, the game is over right there, and the story now is McCord and the offense struggle, late game interception costs Ohio State, right? So completely different storyline based on nothing McCord did. He made a bad decision, a bad throw. It should have been intercepted. Notre Dame still should have gotten stops multiple times throughout the end of that game. Regardless, again, Ohio State, last week again against Maryland, played them pretty close for 3.5 quarters and pulled away late. Again, final score looks good, right? You win by 20, you cover the spread, but in reality, you struggled with a Maryland team who lost to Illinois this week. So just haven't been impressed with the Buckeyes. I don't think they're in the same class as Michigan. I'm really excited to see them play Penn State next week. It's going to be in Ohio State, which is a tough place to play, and we'll get to Penn State in a second, but James Franklin has had 0 success playing Ohio State in their house. But I think Penn State is live there. I believe they're going to be about a 4 to 5 point dog at Ohio State. So we'll learn a lot about both those teams in that matchup next week at Ohio State. I also am just not a fan of Ryan Day whatsoever. I think he's absolutely underachieved relative to the talent level that Ohio State has. And he basically cost them that game against Notre Dame, a 4th and inches late in the game in the second to last drive, and he calls a jet sweep that was stuffed for a 2-yard loss that really should have cost Ohio State the game right there. But again, I don't see Ohio State as a real contender. I understand they're the number 3 team in the country. I understand they're undefeated. But until they prove to me that they can beat a team like Penn State, that they can beat a team like Michigan, I'm not really a believer. And the Big Ten is so bad besides the top 3 teams that we're not really going to see them tested. Notre Dame was that one test, and I think they failed the test and got lucky. Moving on to the number 4 team, a team I am again impressed with here, like Michigan. Florida State, I believed, was a playoff team from the start of the year. They were one of my picks for the playoffs. I picked Georgia, Florida State, Michigan, and Texas, which I believe is all possible still if Texas wins out and is able to win the Big 12 championship. We'll get there in a little bit. But Florida State, again, impressive today, 41-3, dominating victory over Syracuse. They've had 2 very good wins. They went into Clemson a couple weeks ago, came away with a victory in overtime, albeit not a super impressive win. You could argue a lucky win. I'm not sure the post-game win expectancy there, but I doubt it was very high. Clemson missed a kick that was inside of 30 yards that basically would have, I want to say won the game, but it would have put Clemson up 3 with under 2 minutes to go, and Florida State had no timeouts left. So escape there, but you still find a way to win on the road in hostile territory, and it's not like that kick was with 0 seconds to go. Florida State would have had a chance to go down and score. It's not the same as Ohio State and Notre Dame. You also look at that first game against LSU. LSU's offense in the games that don't include playing Florida State, they are averaging just under 50 points per game. That is the most prolific offense in the country, and I can say that confidently now after watching USC's offense stall against a decent defense this week. Against Florida State's defense, LSU, 24 points, and 7 of those were in garbage time. In the second half, the Seminoles absolutely shut down Jalen Daniels, and it's just been an impressive showing from Florida State. They played Boston College close, but that game, again, the final score is kind of unindicative of how that game went. Florida State was dominating most of the game, had a couple mistakes late that allowed it to look close. But you just look at this Florida State team from top to bottom. The defense is solid. I don't think they're great, but they have enough talent there to get by. Offensively, Benson is a great running back out of the backfield. Jordan Travis, I believe, is an underrated Heisman candidate. I don't think he's been talked about enough. He's thrown for 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns, just 1 interception. He's rushed for 2 more touchdowns. I mean, this is a guy who, by the end of this year, will likely eclipse the 8,000-yard passing mark and the 2,000-yard rushing mark on his career. He's been absolutely a stud the last couple of years for Florida State, and he's arguably the most improved player I've ever seen in college football. I mean, this is a guy who was a below-average quarterback back when he was at Louisville and early in his time at Florida State, and he has become one of the better quarterbacks in the country. He's a true dual-threat guy. He can throw the ball downfield. He's accurate. He's athletic. He's elusive. I'm a big Jordan Travis guy. But the best player on the team, and it's not close in my opinion, is Keon Coleman. He had some catches today that just drop your jaw. And Coleman is, in my opinion, the guy who will be the first wide receiver off the board when he comes out. Transfer from Michigan State. Thanks, Mel Tucker, for letting that one go. If you're a Seminole fan, I don't know how you let a guy like that leave your program. He's an absolute stud. And, when you look at it, Florida State in any given game is going to have a quarterback who's either the best quarterback on the field or you're not going to have an edge over him. You're not going to find a quarterback that's, better. Right? You could argue Drake May in the ACC if they play UNC and Florida State meet in the ACC title game. That would be a very even quarterback matchup. But I don't think you're going to see a quarterback that plays against Florida State where you say, yeah, they have the edge over Florida State at that position. And you definitely don't at the wide receiver position. So you've got just an explosive offense, lots of talent, and I think Florida State has a really good chance to run the table and get to the college football playoff. I'd love to see the Seminoles and the Tar Heels in an ACC title game to go to the college football playoff. Obviously, college football is weird. Things happen. It's hard to go undefeated, but I believe even a one-loss Florida State team, assuming it's not to an undefeated UNC team in the ACC title game, I believe they probably still go to the playoffs. And you look at the rest of their schedule. I mean, Miami is probably the toughest team they have left on their schedule. They get them at home. We saw what they've done the last 2 games, dropping 2 in a row to Georgia Tech last week on a ridiculous call by Mario Cristobal, and then losing by 10 to the Tar Heels of North Carolina tonight. But I just don't know if Florida State has a game where they're not going to be favored by at least 7 points before the ACC title game. Oklahoma was off this week. I'm interested to see what the Sooners do the rest of the season. Call me a Texas homer, and I'm not as high on the Longhorns as I was. Maybe I'm an OU hater, but I'm just not sold on them yet. It was a rivalry game against Texas. Again, Texas post-game win expectancy over 78%. Oklahoma shouldn't have won that game. 3 Quinn Ewers turnovers early in the game put Texas in a hole. You have essentially an Oklahoma defense that was the beneficiary of really poor play calling by Steve Sarkisian on the goal line on a 1st and goal from the 1. Texas gets in there, probably wins the game. And then essentially just horrific clock management by Sark at the end of the game. Easy opportunity to, at the very least, run the clock down and kick a field goal and win the game. Went hurry up in the last couple series and ended up kicking a field goal with way too much time left. Gave the ball back to OU and then rushed 3 on the final drive on every possession, every play. So, I'm not sold on Gabriel. He had he had a great drive at the end of the game, but he had chances all earlier throughout the game to put Texas away, and he was very inaccurate with a lot of those throws. So we'll see. I'm not sold on Venables by any means, and he is always good for a stinker. So I'd keep an eye on that West Virginia game. West Virginia is better than advertised, and they play them in a couple weeks. They are going to be in Oklahoma, but that's the one I think that the Sooners, wouldn't shock me if they drop that one. TCU looked a little better today too, so I wouldn't chalk that one up as an automatic win either. But likely going to be an OU Texas rematch in the Big 12 title game with the winner going to the Big 12 championship. I don't see how UT doesn't go if they win out and beat OU, considering the difference in non-conference schedule. Texas went to Alabama and won, and Oklahoma's best non-conference win was SMU. So if you look at it, OU pretty much, win out or lose one. I think they have to win the Big 12 championship to get in, assuming Texas doesn't lose again. Moving on to number 6, Penn State. They were in action today against UMass, won 63-0. Basically a tune-up game before their matchup next week. As we already mentioned, they're going to Ohio State, to Columbus, to take on the Buckeyes in what's going to be a top 6 matchup. It'll be number 3 Ohio State versus number 6 Penn State. And I am fascinated to see this game. Like I said, I'm not totally sold on Ohio State yet. Penn State is an interesting team because they do this sometimes where they look really good, and then the first real test they get, they fail miserably. James Franklin has been really bad in big games as a head coach. And against Ohio State, he's 0-4 in Columbus. So I want to see them do it against a good team. That said, this Penn State team looks better than I've seen in past years. It's probably the best Penn State team I've seen since the Trace McSorley, Saquon Barkley days, and back when James Franklin had a 21-point lead against Ohio State with undefeated Penn State and blew the 21-point lead and lost the game. But, you look at this team, and they're really, really solid all around, but the big question mark, it has to be the quarterback position, Drew Allar. And highly touted coming out of high school. Everybody was calling for him the last couple years as he sat behind Sean Clifford, and we know how that experiment with Clifford went. But Allar has just been very average. I don't want to say average, but he's been good, not great, against subpar competition. And the only, defense with a pulse that Penn State has faced was Iowa. And in that game, Allar, he was 25 for 37 with 4 touchdowns, and he didn't throw an interception. But when you look at it, he actually only threw for 166 yards, 4.5 yards per pass. So lots of dink and dunk, right? I mean, if you're going to throw the ball 37 times and only have 166 yards, that is not an efficient game passing the ball. And that's not going to cut it against Ohio State. Now, Iowa's built on defense. Penn State got up big in that game and was able to run the ball, but I don't know that this offense is all that explosive. And Ohio State hasn't been great defensively, but they have athletes to match up with Penn State. And it's going to be interesting to see that matchup, that Penn State offense versus that Ohio State defense. I think that is the key to the game because I believe Penn State's defense is good enough to really slow down Kyle McCord and the Buckeye offense. So, the question is, can Penn State move the ball efficiently enough and well enough and hit some explosives to be able to score enough points to take down the Buckeyes on the road? And you look at it, even the run game against Iowa, they ran the ball 57 times for just 217 yards. Obviously, 215 yards, sorry. Is that a lot of yards? Yes. When you carry the ball 60 times, it's not. Averaging under 4 yards a carry. Again, very inefficient. You look at the outcome of that game. 31-0 was the final score, averaging less than 5 yards per play, right? So I'm interested to see that matchup. I think that's going to tell us a lot about, these two teams. Is Penn State as good as they've looked? Is Ohio State the fraud that I think they are? I think Penn State has a good shot to pull the upset. If that game was in Happy Valley, I would be all over Penn State as a short dog. I'm hesitant with James Franklin at the helm to take Penn State in that spot, but I do think the Nittany Lions have a good chance to pull the upset. That's going to be a really good matchup next week. I'm excited to see that one. The best matchup of this week actually came from the 7th and 8th ranked teams in the country. The number 7 Washington Huskies defeated the number 8 Oregon Ducks 36-33 in a game that was everything it was cracked up to be and more. It was back and forth early on, and a key turning point in the game. Really, this game should be called the 4th and 3 game for Dan Lanning because he went for it on 4th and 3 three times and failed all 3 times, and that was the difference in the game. The first time came at the very end of the first half. Oregon was in a 4th down and goal, I believe, from the 3-yard line, so essentially a 4th and 3. And instead of kicking the field goal and cutting it to a 1-point deficit, Oregon was going to get the ball back to start the second half, so you cut the lead to 1, essentially got a new ball game where you get the ball first. Advantage Ducks, he decides to go for it. They call a rollout for Bo Nix. Nothing's there. The ball's deflected, incomplete. Huge momentum changer, though, right? Like the 3 points was important to cut it to 1, but you get the ball first, right? Like you're still okay, but the momentum of not scoring any points there when it looked like you were going to take the lead at least, cut it to 1 at the very least. It was off a Michael Penix interception. You don't capitalize, you get no points. And now you got to go into halftime and face your team there. Washington came out, scored, I believe, stopped the Ducks and scored, I believe, on the first drive of the third quarter and took an 11-point lead. After that, though, the Ducks defense stepped up big time. Washington did not score after that touchdown until the final drive of the game. So from the first drive of the second half to the last drive of the second half, everything in between there, Oregon was really good defensively. And I know you look at the score and they gave up 36 points. Washington was the number 1 offense in the country coming in, averaging 45-plus points a game. So Oregon really did a good job defensively in stretches, but they had too many breakdowns. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the Dan Lanning decisions, but Oregon had plenty of chances to win this game, and I was really unimpressed with Washington in this win. I think if this game's in Autzen Stadium, Oregon wins by 10. They outgained Washington by 126 yards. They had the ball late in the game with a lead and a chance to basically seal the game. We'll get there in a second. But I was unimpressed with Washington, and I actually thought Oregon was the better team for most of the game. They showed more mental toughness, being able to battle back down from 11. Late in the game, in the fourth quarter, before Oregon came back, it was a 4th and 3 inside the 10-yard line again. Instead of kicking the field goal, again Lanning went for it. And once again, had some sort of rollout pass for Nix. It was kind of low, tough play, incomplete. The Ducks settled for nothing. 2 times inside the 10-yard line, coming away with 0 points. You get 3 each of those times, you win the game. That's the difference right there. But it all came down to 1 4th and 3 late in the game. And we'll go back actually to the 3rd and 1. So it was 3rd and 1 right near midfield. Oregon had basically run all over Washington in the second half. They were starting to wear the defense down. Washington struggled to stop the run a lot of the second half, and it was mostly due to Bucky Irving, who was outstanding, ran for 126 yards and a touchdown on 23 carries. He made a lot of guys miss throughout the night. On the final drive, it was a 2nd and 10, and he was stuck in the backfield. Irving looked like it was going to be a 1-yard loss, made a man miss, broke about 3 tackles, and was able to get it to a 3rd and 1. So the Ducks need 1 yard. And again, I just don't understand in this situation how teams don't have an under center, quarterback sneak with the ability to push the quarterback from behind nowadays. Doesn't make sense to me. Regardless, the worst decision was that Lanning took Irving out of the game and put the backup Jordan James in. Now, James had run well that night, but Washington was having a fit trying to bring down Bucky Irving all game long. And I just don't understand why you go to the other back there. Regardless, he did it. And instead of, going under center and quarterback sneaking or giving it to your best running back, they went to the backup. He lost 2 yards on the play. So now instead of a 4th and inches or a 4th and 1, where that now it's a legitimate decision. You probably have an argument to go for it there. Instead, he settles goes back to a 4th and 3, and for some reason, to me, that's no decision. Washington was out of timeouts. 2 minutes to go. You pin them deep. Your offense has stopped them. 4 straight possessions. Washington come away with 0 points. 3 of them were 3 and outs. You punt the ball and trust your defense. Instead, Lanning goes for it on 4th and 3. They tried it again every single time on these 4th and 3s. It was a rollout pass from Nix. It wasn't even close. And Washington gets the ball back, scores in 2 plays. They go 50 yards in 2 plays. Oregon did get the ball back. And then I think late in the game, another big mistake by Lanning. Oregon's in field goal range with a chance to tie and send this to overtime. It's a 43-yard field goal. There was 9 seconds to go. Oregon still had a timeout. You work the middle of the field. Washington was giving you about 10 yards. I mean, in a situation like that, the difference between a 43 and a 33-yard field goal are massive. And instead, they tried to throw outside, which they didn't need to do because they had a timeout. They could have gone right over the middle of the field, and the ball was incomplete. Still a makeable field goal attempt, but in an environment like that, with that kind of pressure, and a kid who hadn't kicked many, pressure kicks in his career at Oregon, it's a tough kick. And he pushed it just to the right, and it cost them the game and maybe their season. I don't think Oregon is dead, but they have to win out now. And they'd have to win out and likely get some help from another conference because one of the Power 5 conferences is going to get a team left out. And if Oregon wins out and, Texas wins out or Oklahoma wins out and, a team from the Big Ten, a team from the ACC, a team from the SEC all went out, the Pac-12 is going to be the group that gets left out. They're going to have an undefeated team to get in, barring, some 2-loss teams. And so, huge loss for Oregon, and you can blame it on Dan Lanning. I firmly believe that loss was completely on him. If you kick the field goals inside the 10-yard line, that last drive you were up by 10 instead of 4. And if you punt the ball there, you likely have a good chance to get a stop. So, Washington, on the other hand, again, like I said, wasn't impressed. Penix was inaccurate much of the night. His stats looked fine. His stats looked good. I mean, he threw for 400 yards, but 4 touchdowns, 1 pick, but there was just a lot of really poor, inaccurate throws, and he basically was going with 2 NFL wide receivers against 2 Oregon backup cornerbacks for a stretch of that game. And one starting quarterback was out the entire game. And he still was having trouble, making accurate throws to open receivers. So I was disappointed in Penix's performance. I hadn't seen him play for a full game all year. I saw numbers and they looked good, but against a defense that was, decent, he was okay. He was good. He wasn't great. He didn't look like a Heisman candidate. Washington did not look like a team that I think has a chance to make the playoffs and actually win a game. Could they go undefeated now, looking at the rest of their schedule, and get in? Absolutely they could. But it's going to be tough for them to get in if they lose a game. I just don't see it. Moving on to the number 9 team, Texas. They were on a bye this week. And the Horns, again, we talked about them a little bit. I think they pretty much are in a spot where they need to use this bye week to get healthy. They need to use this bye week to get back on track. They're going to have to basically go through the rest of the season, and they don't have that tough of a schedule. The Big 12 is down this year after OU and Texas, but the Longhorns are basically in a win-out situation if they want to have a shot to get into the playoffs. And really, they're going to need a little bit of help now that I kind of think about it. Washington, if they win out and Texas is a one-loss Big 12 champion, Washington's going to go over the Horns. So you're going to need either a Washington team to lose, or you're going to need an ACC, UNC gets a loss and then they beat Florida State in the ACC championship game. You need a little bit of help somewhere because I don't see how a one-loss Texas team gets over any undefeated conference champion of the Power 5, of the other 4 Power 5 conferences. Number 10 USC took on number 21 Notre Dame in the last top 10 spot, and they will not be there after this week. USC had dropped a spot the last couple weeks despite winning games, but they've been playing with fire for a while now, and it caught up to them tonight. They were absolutely walloped by the Fighting Irish, 20-48. Caleb Williams had arguably his worst game of his career. He was 23 for 37, 199 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, all of which came in the first half. The Trojans as a whole had 5 turnovers, 3 interceptions by Williams, and 2 fumbles. And they actually outgained the Irish in this game. But if you watch the game, it was never close. The Irish did have a kick return for a touchdown, so that takes away a drive of offense that they likely were to have. But they just had success against that USC defense most of the night. Edeme ran down the throat of the Trojans defense, and this is a product of Lincoln Riley and how he recruits and how his teams play. He does not spend enough time recruiting defensive players. No elite defensive players want to play in a scheme like that. And when they play big, physical teams, they have no shot. And it's been his problem since he was at Oklahoma, and it's remained at USC even more so. Obviously, he's early in his tenure there, so, could the defense improve in the next couple of years? Yes, but Alex Grinch, the defensive coordinator, is a highly thought of DC, and they've had no ability to stop anyone this year. Arizona last week put up 40-plus on them. Arizona State, who doesn't score very much, put up 30. Colorado put up 41. I mean, this defense has just been getting absolutely waxed by opposing offenses. And this is why this result is not surprising to me at all. I was on Notre Dame minus 2.5 early in the week. I could not believe that the line was that low. I thought, bad spot for Notre Dame in terms of they're playing their 8th game in 8 weeks, meaning they didn't have a bye through the first 7 weeks. And that included a trip overseas week 1 to play Navy. Week 0. So they played week 0 overseas. They played 8 straight games. The last 4 games, they were at home against Ohio State, at Duke, at Louisville, home versus USC. The most brutal stretch of a schedule for any team in college football. And the only shot USC had here was if Notre Dame was too beat up. Because when you look at the physicality that Notre Dame plays with, and you look at how USC plays the game, traditionally, those games have gone the way of the more physical team. And that's what happened tonight. Unless you just have absolutely superior athletes, then it's just going to be hard to win. And that Notre Dame team, who really doesn't have all that great of a pass rush, put pressure on Caleb Williams, got in his face, made him make tough, bad decisions. And this game wasn't close from the jump. Notre Dame jumped on him and never let up. I think the closest it got was maybe 11 in the third quarter, and the play after it got to 11, Notre Dame returned the ensuing kickoff for a touchdown and basically sealed it. This ends This ends USC's shot at a national title, because there is no way with a loss like that you're getting in over any other one-loss teams. They already were not respected by any of the coaches of the AP poll. Again, they were number 8, dropped to number 9 after the performance against Colorado. After last week's performance against Arizona going to 4 overtimes, they dropped to number 10, and now they're going to be all the way back to 17, 18, 19, maybe even outside the top 20. And this isn't surprising. I didn't ever think this USC team was that great. I wonder now if Caleb Williams, it's a bad showing. When you play the first, physical defense that's more NFL-like and you look that bad, I've never been a big Caleb Williams guy. Obviously, he's good. Obviously, he's a great player. But, people talking about him being the best player in college football and a transcendent player and the best college prospect since Mahomes, I don't quite see it. I think he's really good, but he tries to improv too much, and we saw it tonight. 3 picks, trying to make plays that he didn't need to make. And the Trojans are out of it now. Let's go through a quick couple of other recaps, and we'll just kind of go through some of these quickly. This was an absolutely wild week in college football. We had 2 Hail Marys at the end of regulation to win games. The first one came on Thursday night, I believe, or Friday night, it was Houston in West Virginia. Houston led most of the game. West Virginia scores to go ahead with about 15 seconds to go. You get the classic unsportsmanlike call after the touchdown. And what happens? Now you're kicking off from the 20 instead of the 35. What happens next? Well, you get a pretty decent return when you're returning the ball from, catching it on the 15 or 20 yard line. Ball gets down to about the 35. Couple plays, you get out of bounds at the 40, and all of a sudden you got a legit shot at the end zone. And what happened? Houston threw it up, and I'll tell you what, if you're a team and you're a coach and you're putting in a Hail Mary play, as all coaches do, you absolutely should look the way of the tip play, because that is the way most Hail Marys are caught. You rarely see, with the exception of Aaron Rodgers to Richard Rodgers, some 5 to 10 years ago, where he threw the 60-yard Hail Mary and Rodgers, it just stuck in his hands. The majority of Hail Marys from both the college and professional level come off tipped balls. And both of these, that's exactly what happened. The ball was tipped. The Houston receiver caught it, scored on the last play of the game, and the Cougars get their first Big 12 conference win. Crazy ending. And that was one of the first games of the week, and then one of the last games of the week happened just a short hour or two ago. Colorado State, in one of the most miraculous comebacks I've ever seen in my entire life in college football, trailing by 20 points with 4 minutes to go in the game. They score a touchdown with 4:06 to cut it to 13. They kick an onside kick, recover the ensuing onside kick. They go down the field, and on a 4th down and 10, incomplete pass, game over. Late flag comes in for pass interference. Colorado State goes down and scores, cuts it to 6. They kick another onside kick and recover it again. However, a block was thrown before the 10 yards. It was called back, so Boise State takes over. Still, Boise State gets a first down, the game's over, and on 3rd down, they get the first down. The quarterback slides, game over again, right? Broncos win, nope. Flag down, holding, brings it back. Boise State forced a punt. They punt the ball and pin Colorado State on their own 12-yard line with 33 seconds left and no timeouts, needing a touchdown. And what does Colorado State do? They go right down the field. They get the ball inside the Boise State 40-yard line, and they throw, yes, a Hail Mary. And what happens? You got it. It was tipped, and it was caught. And even on the replay, it looked like the ball might have hit the ground. It was hard to tell. There was no way it was getting overturned. Colorado State scores. Of course, there's an unsportsmanlike call, so the extra point gets moved back, and we have to sweat an extra point there. But in a 30-30 game, they knocked through the extra point from 35 yards, and Colorado State with one of the most miraculous comeback victories I've ever seen. Back-to-back nights with Hail Mary wins. We had North Carolina undefeated and tied for first place in the ACC, taking on the Miami Hurricanes off that brutal loss to Georgia Tech, where all they had to do was take a knee, and Mario Cristobal threw up all over himself and decided, no, we don't need to take a knee. We're going to run the ball and try to run the clock out. They did that, only they didn't run the clock out. They fumbled the ball. Georgia Tech got the ball back and somehow scored with no timeouts and under 25 seconds to go. Went 78 yards in 3 plays and scored a touchdown. Miami came into this one, you wonder about the factor of, like, is this team going to play hard for a coach who just costs our undefeated season? In the first half, it looked like they were playing hard for him. I mean, Miami had a 3-point lead at halftime, and they had gotten to Drake May a lot. He did not look good. He had been sacked 5 times. He wasn't accurate. But in the second half, he absolutely looked fantastic. He looked like, a guy who should be in the Heisman contention. He's looked at as one of the best NFL prospects, but he hasn't really been talked about for Heisman contention. He's single-handedly keeping North Carolina in college football playoff contention. And May ended up with 273 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's got to be in the Heisman talk now. Tez Walker was back last week and got his feet wet with a couple catches. He had a breakout game. He had 6 catches for 132 yards and 3 touchdowns. Omarion Hampton, the running back for North Carolina, had 24 rushes for 197 yards. He had about 100 yards called back by penalty and on holding. North Carolina was called for 14 penalties for 147 yards of penalty yardage. The ACC officials are disgusting. There was 21 penalties that were accepted in the game for over 250 yards. Terrible to watch, but UNC came back in the third quarter, took the lead, took control of the game. I believe got up by as many as 17, ended up winning by 10. And the Tar Heels, they look like a top 10 team right now on the back of Drake May and Tez Walker. So I'm excited to see the Tar Heels. It's fun to see a team like that in college football be good because, you get tired of seeing the Alabamas and the Georgias. I would say Texas, but Texas hasn't been good in a long time. But, you want to see some teams like that have success. It's good for college football. It's fun to watch, and that's a fun team to watch. They got a really good offense. They can get after the quarterback on defense and rush him, and I'm excited to see that one. Oregon State rolls UCLA at home. Oregon State with 1 loss to Washington State by 3 points on the road. That's a team that has been really, really good this year. Oregon State, man, Jonathan Smith, the head coach for the Beavers, that dude is an absolute badass. Turn that program around. That was one of the worst college football programs I've ever seen for a number of years. And he goes in there and absolutely flips a switch. They go in a couple years from being the laughingstock of college football in the Power 5, one of the worst Power 5 teams, to a legitimate contender for a Pac-12 championship. DJ Uiagalelei, the transfer from Clemson, has been better than he has ever been in his collegiate career. I wouldn't say he's great, but he's been performing really well. They roll UCLA. The freshman quarterback for UCLA is just, I don't understand how they're starting him. He's horrific, and he threw 3 interceptions, including a pick 6 that flipped the whole game right at the end of the first half tonight. Speaking of Washington State, who beat Oregon State a couple weeks ago, I don't know what has happened to them, and specifically what's happened to their offense. They looked unstoppable the first 5 games of the season. In the first 5 games, they scored a total of 183 points, 46 points per game. In the past 2 games, they have scored a total of 23 points. They have put up just 414 yards of total offense in 2 games. Cam Ward, the quarterback who transferred from UIW, looked like a legitimate Heisman contender through 5 weeks. I mean, I was so impressed with Washington State those first 5 weeks, and I faded them the first couple weeks, and I thought, no, there's no way they're this good. There's no way they're this good. And right when I thought, okay, maybe they are this good, they just shit themselves 2 weeks in a row. Disappointing loss last week at UCLA, but you could chalk that one up to playing a good UCLA defense, and, they were due for an off game, right? They had exceeded expectations. But as 7.5-point favorites at home at night, Wazoo is a very tough place to play. And to lay an egg like that, they were beat 44-6 tonight against an Arizona team that was 3-3 coming in. Now, Arizona's very improved, and they're getting better every week. Gave USC a run for their money last week, went to 4 overtimes. But you can't lay an egg like that at home, and that's unfortunate because I was, just like UNC, I like to see other teams play well, and I was hoping Washington State was actually going to make a kind of a Cinderella run at a Pac-12 title here. They look like they're in big, big trouble. How about Louisville 6-0 taking on Pittsburgh 1-4? And this is why Vegas is smart and most people who bet are dumb. And I honestly took Pittsburgh in this spot, and it made no sense, and that's why I took it. When you see a line that's too good to be true, it usually is. Pittsburgh opened as about an 8.5-point favorite. It was bet all the way down to 7 at kickoff. The public was all over Louisville. You have a Louisville team who's undefeated, coming off of a huge upset, beating Notre Dame, who was a top 10 team. You're playing a Pittsburgh team who has looked anemic offensively. They've had one win all season, and it was against an FCS team. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense when you look at that line on the base surface, but you add in there was some weather. You add it's in Pittsburgh. You add it's a huge letdown spot for Louisville, and there's a reason that line was coming down. There's a reason that, it went to a key number of 7, and it was close to going through that key number of 7. And what happens? Pittsburgh wins outright and spoils Louisville's undefeated season. Jeff Brom is a guy that a lot of people are high on, the head coach at Louisville. He's at Purdue for a long time. He's always good at exceeding expectations and getting the most out of his guys, but then he gets to a game that he should win, and that's when they lay an egg, and that's exactly what happened tonight. Disappointing loss for Louisville, and pretty much played themselves out of any chance to play for a college football playoff spot, and likely they're not going to be playing for an ACC championship spot either. Alabama wins again, but struggles at home against Arkansas as 19.5-point favorites, and they win by 3. Arkansas had the ball late with a chance to drive and either tie or win the game. Actually got the ball into Alabama territory on the final drive. A sack on a 3rd down KJ Jefferson took, basically ended the game because they had to punt it away, and Alabama got a couple first downs to salt it away. But, man, Alabama just does not look like the Alabama of old. And I know they keep winning games, and I think the SEC is down this year, besides Georgia, even Georgia. But besides Georgia and the top of it, it's just not great, especially at the bottom. And this is an Arkansas team that, got stomped by Texas A&M on a neutral field a couple weeks ago, right? They played a couple close games. They played LSU close, but LSU's defense is horrific. And, Alabama, this is a game at home that you need to run away and hide. And what's preventing them from doing that is their quarterback play. I'm not saying they're great defensively. I'm not saying they're great running the ball. But when you have a kid who is throwing for almost under 50% completion percentage and relying solely on the deep ball to Burton, it's really tough to have any consistency offensively. And that's why, Texas with a good team but a quarterback that's not great was able to go into Tuscaloosa in a night game and win that game by double digits. On the other side, we'll go real quick through these. Cam Rising continues to not play for Utah. He warms up every week, and you think maybe this is the week he finally comes back. At this point, if I'm Kyle Whittington, I'm just saying, dude, why don't you just sit out the rest of the year, man? This is a distraction, okay? Utah's got it's sad, too, because Cam Rising is a good quarterback, and Utah has a very good team. They have an elite defense, but without Kuthi, the tight end who's been injured as well, and Cam Rising, totally different offense. That's a playoff contender who is competing in the Pac-12 to win and maybe even be undefeated if they have their quarterback and top tight end. Without them, they could sneak in the Pac-12 title game, but they're not a playoff contender. Duke rolls NC State with a backup quarterback. NC State also made a change at quarterback, benching Brandon Armstrong, and Duke rolls NC State. Big matchup next week. The Blue Devils are essentially a play away from being undefeated, and they play Florida State next week at the home of the Seminoles. That'll be a good matchup to see. It'll be interesting to see if Riley Leonard, the quarterback for Duke, plays in that one. He was injured late in the Notre Dame game, but it seemed like he was questionable to go today, so you have to imagine they thought they could probably get through NC State here without him, and if he's healthy for the Florida State game, that could be a really good matchup. Jimbo Fisher, once again, what can you say? I mean, A&M is a dumpster fire. How do you continue to just underperform? It was a good spot there, right? Like, a lot of people think Tennessee is better than they are. It is a tough place to play in Neyland Stadium, but you're not playing at night there. And you got a team that has shown, they have the ability to play with good teams. They hung with Alabama last week, right? But every time you think that this team has a chance to turn the corner, they never do. And as a Texas fan, I can't lie, I absolutely love it. I love watching this team be a dumpster fire. I love Jimbo's press conferences. It's like my favorite thing of the week to watch a Jimbo Fisher press conference after an A&M loss where he rehashes every play that happened in the game. And then, proceeds to say we got to be better as coaches, despite being terrible as coaches and an anemic offense. I understand they have a backup quarterback, but there's too much talent on that team, to underperform like this. You just get too many recruits, too many 5-stars, and you're going to start seeing guys decommit. And it's happened, and people are transferring out of there. But, at what point do you cut ties? Because, Fisher is a really good recruiter, but with NIL deals nowadays and the boosters that A&M has, it seems to me that recruiting from a head coaching perspective isn't that big of a deal. Like, you should be able to recruit at A&M now with NIL deals just as well with a better coach who's just maybe a slightly worse recruiter. I understand Jimbo is a very good recruiter, but it's like, at what point do you say enough is enough, right? How many disappointing losses does it take? If you're an Aggie fan, ask yourself that. Because if I was an Aggie fan, I'd be just calling for Jimbo's job every week. And I'd be sick to my stomach watching these games. Okie State, what a turnaround. Losing at home to South Alabama a couple weeks ago by 24. A South Alabama team that has one of the worst secondaries in the country. Mike Gundy, speaking of, shitty coaching, was playing 3 quarterbacks and having them split time. And one of them was his son. That was the definition of nepotism. The guy is horrific. Gunnar Gundy shouldn't be on, Alaska State Tech. They should not have him playing quarterback at Oklahoma State. They finally went with Bowman, a former Texas Tech quarterback, and steadied the ship at QB. The defense was playing better. And Kansas, as a 3-point favorite, was leading by double digits in that game. And Okie State found a way to pull it out at home, as they tend to do in Stillwater. Tough place to play. Interested to see the spot next week from a betting perspective. When you look at Okie State on the road, they're going to be coming off 2 upset wins. Market's going to be high on them. They're a different team on the road, and I can't get some of those early season woes out of my mind. I'm going to be looking to fade Okie State next week if it's a good spot. Moving on, Missouri rolls Kentucky. Missouri's been a pleasant surprise, right? They're literally a couple plays away from being undefeated. That game last week against LSU, they gave it away. They led for most of the game. They were up double digits late and gave it away. Ended up not even covering on that just brutal pick 6. If you had Missouri plus 5.5, my condolences. I gave that out as a best bet on the podcast, and I've given out that in Texas Tech this year plus 6 against Oregon. I've lost both on pick 6s. The fact that I'm having a positive year in college football with the bad beats I've had is a miracle in itself. And speaking of bad beats and speaking of dumpster fires, let's look at Michigan State, who today was my best bet. And they were plus 5 at Rutgers on homecoming. It was rainy. It was wet. Advantage Michigan State in the run game. Advantage Michigan State in stopping the run. And they led 24-6 in the fourth quarter with the ball. And the punter drops a punt on about the 5-yard line. The ball rolls in the end zone. He's unable to fall on it. Rutgers scores. All of a sudden, it's 24-13. Then all of a sudden, Rutgers gets the ball back, and they go 14 plays down the field and score their first offensive touchdown of the game. And all of a sudden, you look up, there's 8:30 to go. It's a one-possession game. They get the 2-point conversion and cut it to 3. I'm sweating my plus 5 now. And then On the ensuing kickoff, Michigan State absolutely shits themselves and doesn't field a pooch kick. Rutgers picks the ball up. The first offensive play following, they run for 35 yards and a touchdown, and within 3.5 minutes, they went from down 24-6 to up 27-24. After a botched extra point, they were up by 3, and luckily, for my sake, they were able to run the clock out, and Michigan State got the cover +5. But my goodness, what a dumpster fire Michigan State has been. That's a game that you have a 99.9% win probability, having the ball up 18 in the fourth quarter, and to choke that one away as well as you were playing is just disgusting. And that should have been an outright win for the Spartans. Maybe a turning point in their season. Instead, they lose in heartbreaking, demoralizing fashion. And now you got to go play Michigan next week. Good luck. So, dumpster fire alert there in Sparty. Matt Campbell is an elite coach. Iowa State as 5-point underdogs rolls Cincinnati on the road. I don't know why Matt Campbell continues to stay at Iowa State with that, void of talent. Because if he went to a big program, man, he could really compete for national titles. I'm interested to see how much longer he stays there, because he is a really good coach. I'm a huge Matt Campbell fan, and Iowa State just finds ways to win games every year under Matt Campbell, and it's impressive that they are in the mix for conference titles some years, and they have a winning record. They're going to bowl games. This guy needs a job at a big school. I know he's been loyal to Iowa State, and I respect that a lot. But at what point do you say, okay, I want to compete for national titles? That's what I'm here to do. I don't want to stay in using 2- and 3-star guys and FCS transfers, try to grind out 7 and 8 wins from a team that's really a 4-win football team. But huge fan of Matt Campbell. Another awesome win today. South Carolina gives one away against Florida. Spencer Rattler played really good. I don't know where the performance from Graham Mertz came from. He threw for 370 yards and 3 touchdowns. I've never seen Graham Mertz play that well. They were also fortunate on the final drive. A ball that was tipped and very well could have been intercepted bounced to another receiver. They get down inside the 20 and score on a 2nd and 15 to win the game with a few seconds left. Terrible choke by South Carolina to lose another one. I took South Carolina's win total under 6.5 earlier this year, so I like that ticket. But I really thought South Carolina was alive. I wouldn't say dog, but 2-4 team against a 4-1 team. A lot of people like Florida in that spot, and I thought South Carolina had a good chance to win it, but unfortunate. Iowa-Wisconsin, the ugliest football game of the season, set the sport back 50 years. 17-6 was the final. And Iowa pulled off the upset as double-digit dogs. And again, Iowa with a backup quarterback and the ugliest offense you've ever seen somehow finds a way to win. They somehow always find a way to win and be in the mix for the Big Ten championship because they are on the opposite side of Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. They need to fix those divisions in the Big Ten. That's ridiculous. Lastly, Avery Johnson of Kansas State with the performance of the week. Backup quarterback for Kansas State comes in. Will Howard's been hobbled the last couple weeks. Kansas State has struggled. They've already lost 2 games. A team that won the Big 12 championship last year, beating TCU in the title game. And Howard struggled last week on the road at Okie State. He's had an injury. It's limited what he's been able to do. They put in Avery Johnson, the backup. He ran the ball 13 times for 90 yards for 5. Yes, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 rushing touchdowns as a quarterback. And Goldilocks with his long hair was running all over the Texas Tech Red Raiders. You could throw as many tortillas as you want on the field in Texas Tech. They were not going to slow down Avery Johnson. He put on a show out there. And every time I looked up, I got 6 TVs going, watching every game. Every time I looked up, that dude was walking in the end zone. He had an absolutely incredible performance. He was a stud tonight, and Kansas State got a much-needed win on the road at Texas Tech. Heck of a week for college football. One of the better weeks I've seen. Obviously, we talked about the 2 Hail Marys, but really incredible games. I had a blast today watching games, and I can only hope the rest of the season is even close to this good. That's all for the college football recap show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Week 7 college football in the books. It was a heck of a weekend. Exciting games. Had some overtime thrillers early in the week. Had some Hail Mary game winners as time expired. Really exciting. Got some great matchups next week. We'll be back later this week with a preview show of all things NFL and college football, where we break down the big games from college football Week 8 and the NFL Week 7. That'll be coming to you Wednesday or Thursday. And we'll also be back earlier in the week with a recap of the NFL, where we'll talk everything that happened on Sunday. So thanks again, you guys, for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe on our channel, Slobberknocker Sports. Support our channel and follow us on social media at SlobPod, at SLOBPOD on Instagram and Twitter. I appreciate you guys tuning in and all your support. We're going to try to bring you great content this whole year for college football and for NFL. And we got hoops in the college ranks and NBA coming up here in a couple weeks. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Have a great weekend and good luck with your Sunday bets and Monday Night Football.